I'll just wait for my partner in crime to sit next to me.
I'm here.
She's here. I suppose we need to introduce ourselves? Probably should, and I'll let Jude introduce herself, and then I'll give a brief introduction of myself. And what I will say is this is not a lecture on rivers, because I've been doing that for 40 years. This is actually about a 10-year art science journey, before there was art science, that me and Jude have been doing inadvertently in many places around the world, and now most recently in Corris, which is fun. So I'll let Jude talk to us first. I can see Veronica's hand. That's fine. No, that's fine. That's fine. Can I just say, in terms of the presentation, ladies and gentlemen, can you just put a thumbs up or wave your hands? You can see the presentation. You can see reconciliation of art and the science in the water realm. Fantastic. We're in business. Okay. And Jude normally drives, actually. She's the driver. But on this occasion, I might drive it in terms of pushing the button. And we'll see how we go. But I'll let Jude introduce herself. But what we probably need to do is see a picture of ourselves. So, oh, that's all right. Just go for it. Can they see us? I'm sure they can. Hold on.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Sorry,
No, I can keep talking forever. It's my livelihood. We've had a wonderful evening. Rebecca, cool. We've been treated like royalty here. We've had wonderful food, wonderful walks, and all the folks that are going to come in the future, please come, because you'll learn lots of stuff. This is not the presentation, but we could do this one as well if you want to. But we'll get there. It won't start without us. Oh. And Abby's doing the wonderful business. Nearly. We're good.
We're fine.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. So I'm going to let Jude introduce herself. I'm going to again give you a bit of context, and we're taking from there. There's quite a lot of stuff here, and if I get bored of talking to myself, and actually Jude will get bored of me talking before that, we will stop. But there's quite a lot of stuff here, and I've seen the folks, and I've been watching some of you over the last 2 days. If you get bored, turn off. No, don't.
No, read the book, but keep it on.
Okay, keep it.
Some excitement will happen later.
Keep it on. The excitement happen later. I've been harassed here from the audience already.
Okay.
But anyway, Jude.
Hello, everyone. Hi, I'm Jude Macklin, and me and Mark are here at Maelor, really learning about how to gather up this sense of place with other artists, and really enjoying being out and about in the landscape. And we've all given presentations now, and it's our turn now to share with you. And although within our group, we've talked a lot about my practice, my art practice, the artist, Mark as a scientist, and he's talked about his thing. But an important part of what we do individually is facilitated by the fact that we're together and part of the same thing, really. And that's what this slide presentation highlights, I think. The way that we can collaborate. So art and science collaboration is what this is about.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce some stuff. It's not too technical, hopefully. That's not being patronizing, because complicated stuff, if you can explain it simply, is not complicated. So let's, as I'm a classic academic for 40 years, I actually have 3 chairs in different universities around the world. It doesn't make any difference. I always have to have a structure. And what you've got here is, and you always do it in 3 parts, is we've got a little bit of context in terms of, and this is sort of serious stuff. And I might come across on occasions of being facetious, but I'm not. I'm massively passionate about what we do, and I'm massively passionate in terms of the very bad place we are currently in terms of the planetary and climate crisis. And I've been working on this for 40 years, even when we were anticipating the next ice age. So yeah, it's something that's been in my mind. So I'll give you a couple of slides in terms of rivers, climate change, and the relationships. Then, and this is why it might take an hour, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take you through a 10-year journey. It's actually been a 43-year-old journey, as we discovered this evening, in terms of what me and Jude have been doing. And we've both got our own practices. Jude is an educator, an artist, a mum, a gardener. Oh, I was choked up at that point. What am I? I'm an academic.
You're lucky to be married to her.
Veronica says I'm lucky to be married to her. Actually, that's very true, but I know that already.
Quite right, but
Quite right. Get on with it. But anyway, I get prodded, and this is rather bizarre because I'm sitting in front of the folks here, and it's very intimate. But realising that there's an audience behind this screen, so I won't be an arsehole. Anyway, be good, Veronica. So, and what we're going to do is in terms. I know you're Australian. You told me that many times before, right? I'm from Peckham, but that's another story. So what we're going to do is going to tell you, and it's constructed in an academic way. There's a whole series of publications which is shown at the end that folks are interested in reading, of our sort of journey, which sort of started by accident, as all these things do, and what we've ended up now. And actually, in terms of me as a research professor, this has become now one of the most important aspects of my practice. I'm not sure whether Jude it's the most important point of her practice, but it is certainly for me in terms of communicating the impact and implications of climate change, the struggles that we're going to need to do as a society. And we have grandchildren. It can get cliched, but this stuff does matter. Annoyingly, in terms of this, Abby, can I, before we start, can I just not be rude because I'm picky? Could you just come and change the screen here so I can actually see on this? Bear with me, ladies and gentlemen, so I can see the whole thing there. And then, is that all right?
I think so.
It's all right. Always appoint people who are clever than yourselves. I've said that so many times. Perfect.
Oh,
that's great.
Yay.
Okay. I make my living, and I've done that for a long time, in terms of the impacts of climate change on rivers. And I'm not giving you a lecture on that, but I just want to highlight the fact that in the last 20 years or so, we've seen a whole range of extreme flood events, starting with York in 2000. My current institution is in Lincoln, so we've got Wainfleet, All Saints, there were a group as well, in Lincolnshire in 2019. And the word I hate genuinely, unless it's used carefully, is this term unprecedented. And when you read or see or the term unprecedented in terms of floods, unfortunately, that is not the case. And one of the bad news stories in terms of my science is that things are only going to get worse. I pushed the down arrow at this point, Abby, and to go down, so to speak.
Just click on that.
Okay, fine. Okay. All the folks have gone off screen. The very bad news is that the impacts of climate change are only going to get a lot worse. And you can see my mouse here. This is one of the longest, if not the longest, records of flooding that we have in the UK. This is York. Postman Pat is being drowned at this point, so we shouldn't jest, I suppose. And what this shows very interestingly, in red, okay, I'm gonna go back. Oh, bear with me. I'm getting used. No.
Sorry about that, guys. We'll just reshare the screen now.
Actually, stop for a minute. Let me just check.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back. Professor Macklin has had his sort of brain fart in terms of technology, but hopefully we're where we should be. As I say, there's not much good news. I mean, I think there's good news in terms of what humanity can do in the future and always will. But in terms of the impacts of climate change, the very bad news, this is one of the longest flood records at York. Arrow here, flooded York. Postman Pat, as I mentioned before. This was in 2000. As shown in black is the record of gauge floods. Is shown in blue is the periods of where there were stage records. And then these are the historical records shown in red. And as you will see that in terms of the gauge records, we're approaching, but we're not close to what we saw particularly in the mid 13th century and actually in the mid 17th century as well. And this was without the accelerated global warming we're seeing at the present. So, dare I say, the worst is yet to come. And I'll skip over that. We're not going to talk about this, but we're talking about sort of floods and rivers and so on. And I'm mindful of this, and I put this in because of Veronica. We do a lot of stuff in dryland rivers around the world, particularly in Australia. And I worked for many, many years in the Nile. And we should never forget as well that in terms of societal challenge, in terms of climate change, there have been notable periods of what it describes as collapse. Actually, I would see it as the population revolting and having a nicer life rather than being taxed by their pharaohs or kings, but that's a rather provocative statement. But the point I'm making is that in terms of major droughts, rivers dry up. And in terms of this picture here, this is a well dated to the Old Kingdom collapse, 2200 BC. This was an active riverbed at the time, and it dried out. And you can see down here, these are old flood sediments, and things change. So the point I'm making, we've just got on to the introduction, so that's at least 15 minutes. There is extremes in terms of climate, both from wet and dry. And what started for me, and this is the point where I will let Jude speak, what started for me in, I think, 2009, is I was involved in an archaeological project in Romania, looking at the development of the first farmers in Europe. And my co-collaborator, Doug Bailey, incredible character in more ways than 10, said, you know, we need to get the arts in here. We need to get the performance in here. And I won't do the expletives, but they were all there. And I said, oh, you know, my wife's an artist and the rest of it. And that's how it started. And what you'll now see, and if you can bear with us, and Veronica says you've got to, I'm looking at the audience here. So if they get bored, we go very quickly. If they're asleep, we turn this off. But we go through this journey and we give some sort of signposts towards the end. I want to get this right. Do I push that one there?
Yeah.
Okay. This is Magura. This is one of the oldest tales, which is basically an anthropogenic mound. It's got a medieval church on top. It's one of the most iconic things in terms of its archaeology, in terms of its place, rivers you could ever imagine. And what we were asked to do was to work with the local children, the local people, and I was privileged to work with Jude and a lot of other artists, and I will pass over to Jude at this point.
Yes, we went to Romania and we had to integrate with the big project, lots of artists, lots of scientists, and working with this community. And I wanted to work with the school and the school children, but it was summer holidays. So we thought we would only get 1 or 2 students, children who would arrive to take part. And we wanted to use, we wanted to get information from them, really. It was their place. We were intruding on their place. So they needed to tell us about themselves, first of all. So we started with self-portraits and drawing, concertina books, walking, talking. Where do they live? They showed us where they lived. Go with that one.
Yep, okay.
And we wanted to combine archaeological finds with contemporary finds and look at the difference of how these objects and layers of history rested in the soils and became part of the stratigraphy of their past and their history. So we collected lots of rubbish on our walks, all different plastics that came up. And then we walked eventually to where there was a site exposed with archaeological finds, which were how old?
Which were Neolithic. So basically these are sort of 4,300 BC. So these are very old indeed. And
along the route, we asked the children, you know, where their favourite places were, and they told us about that, and they asked their grandparents and their parents, because in the village they all lived in the same houses together as this community with several hierarchies of families and grandparents. And we actually planted, didn't we, some of these
figurines.
Yeah, the figurines within the archaeological stratigraphy that we could use and handle, and then we worked from those, and then they made themselves as figurines, and then we drew those, so it became very much a circle of events. And working also, we wanted to bring drawing in, aerial photos, Google Maps, and made a mural as well of this idea of sense of place. Thinking that it was school holidays and we would only get a few kids, the whole school turned up. Wow. So every day we had 40 for a whole week that kept coming, and we were being dropped at the school and then picked up afterwards, and we felt like prisoners because the kids wouldn't let us go home, and we had to wait for our late arrival of our pickup.
Yeah.
And we saw them perform for us lots of dances, and we had to join in, and lots of tangential outcomes occurred from this fantastic week of making art. So along the way, this was one thing that wasn't planned. And because I also at the time was teaching willow weaving, and we were looking at these Neolithic pots, we thought we were working with this guy who was a ceramics expert,
Dutch ceramics,
saying, you know, how do you think they made these? How do you think they made these? So I came up with the idea of using a willow structure, because I knew how pliable it was and how you could make baskets, obviously, the weaving. And we used it as a mold. So we went to hunt and gather the willow that we knew was growing around the village, lined it with leaves that we picked, and pressed the clay in, just to see, just to experiment. And there was another artist who was a ceramic contemporary artist working in ceramics, who built this clay pit. And we fired all these pots that we made, the children made pots as well, from local clay, just to sort of emulate, really, and to see what it would have been like to have made these vessels that were vital to carry things, to put things in. And other things that happened, we did drawing, more concertina books there that I was making of the the Neolithic figurines that we were privileged to sort of handle from the museum. Yeah, and I got everyone to make prints, all the other artists scientists that were involved, they all made a print. I took some lino and made them all do drawings.
It's got your pretty feet there with your sandals for scale.
Pretty feet, yeah. There we are.
Okay. Oh, back to me now, just very briefly. That was a fascinating and actually a very challenging week, 2 weeks, actually 3 weeks and longer, because neither me or Jude now knew how we were going to work together. We were with a team, but we were sort of treated nicely as individuals, and it was fun. And I think we both thought at that sort of stage it was a sort of a one-off. But then, and it's not always me that leads these things, and increasingly, and what's fantastic in terms of the, do I call myself an artist now? I could call myself many things. Hold on. So, you see my drawing. Okay, sorry, but you can hear the okay, they're unpicking me as we speak. But yeah, I think what's interesting is that in terms of this stuff, initially it was probably myself that was leading it. It has become sort of co-led. And what's nice for me as a scientist who's passionate in terms of telling, not in terms of preaching, but actually in terms of educating, not a teacher, Veronica, as we talked this morning, it's education in terms of things that matters. So anyway, I had and I think this is the first time I met Ginny in Utrecht. I had what was called the Bel van Sulen chair. Doesn't really matter what that is, but we had 4 fantastic months in Utrecht. And for me, it was great. Jude, I should also sort of make clear, if folks are interested in these presentations or not, they're going to be stored and available, looking at Abby here. And we're more than happy that they are shared. So you can revisit. So the first thing in terms of Romania was just Jude as the artist communicator. I had no role in that at all, okay? It was classic art, science, as far as I'm concerned, dull stuff. It wasn't being dull because I was with Jude and we had a really nice time, whatever. And then when we went to Utrecht, it was a similar situation. I was doing my things and we thought it was important that Jude got involved. And I will be quiet at this point and I will pass on to you.
Yes. So off we went for the extended period. We stayed in Amsterdam. We stayed in Utrecht.
Yeah.
And I got myself a residency at Amsterdam's Graphisch Atelier at the time. And that's where I went every day on the train. Because Mark at that point was spinning up a project, collecting data from rivers and looking at river histories, but not in Amsterdam, of course, because that's where all the rivers are constrained in canals, in a man-made engineered canal system. So to begin to make prints for me was quite frustrating. Not getting out and about in the countryside that I was used to and seeing the rivers in their natural habitats, their natural environments. So it took a couple of, well, probably 4 or 5 weeks until we actually were able to get out on field work. And then we came into these environments where the rivers were free, the streams were free. And I began to take videos, and my prints really changed in the response that I made. And I was able to listen to the scientists working, to watch them working, and listen to the birds, basically. So the prints I made first were having to find images that portrayed the water in these confined, restricted straitjackets, really. And these were the prints I started off with, and gradually, as we got out and about, they became bigger, they became longer. And the freedom is sort of represented, yeah, in the prints. So the development of a response, as I'm working away, and then I travel with Mark and his colleagues and just try to find a way to respond to a message, really, that the water is giving, that the land is giving, in a sort of abstract way that resonates some sort of resilience from nature and honesty from the water itself.
We good?
Muted. So wood cuts and lino cuts were the main printmaking methods that I used at the time, and still do. Favourite methods, really interacting, really physical, really tactile, and sort of tangibly making things that produce what you can see you've made. So quite straightforward. That on?
I'm trying to do this. We'll get the ladies and gentlemen. Okay, we can do that.
Wow.
Oh yeah, okay, right. There we go.
Yeah, so over this period in staying in Utrecht, working in Amsterdam, and then finally getting out into the countryside to Belgium, to Germany, looking at the rivers there on field trips where scientists were getting information. And finally, I was able to respond in a different way because we got into the countryside and saw the rivers in a different way. And so my prints changed. Letterpress was available at Amsterdam's Graphisch Atelier. And these are quite big prints. I loved using these great big letters, old, very old wooden letterpress. And these arise really from simply spending time, you know, in those environments which are away from home, thinking about different things, and they wouldn't have been produced otherwise. Yeah, the corridor that I had to display all my work from the residency was quite narrow and long. So I wanted to make something that really did show this streaming. I think this was called streaming. So I began to concertina the paper. I discovered all these lovely papers. This one is printed on a paper called Holland paper.
You don't say.
Which had that watermark in it, and it just creased, you know, really crisply and fabulously along the edge. So I just began to make long prints, cut them up. And as you walk by these prints, obviously you got a feeling of change and movement, and that was what I was after. So starting from the very first small prints, you know, over everyday working, it just happened into something else that was probably not final and could still be developed, I think. But time ran out.
It did, and time always sort of runs out. And so in terms of the next phase, and actually me and Jude have written this sort of narrative up as a academic paper, and we'll share you the links and things at the end, so you can, if you want to, relive some of this stuff, and there's some words that go along with this. So this is in the sort of this is probably 2010, 11, something like that. And as you probably all are aware of, that there was a big sort of kick in terms of art science at that time. We didn't really know much about it, but we actually thought a lot of it was pants, to be quite honest. And I was so sick of seeing polar bears sitting on top of ice cubes disappearing. I'm afraid I got rather bored. So what we decided to do was actually do these things together. And the first joint residency, and I sort of I came out, so to speak, in terms of my colleagues, of saying I was going to Spain. I said, "Oh, you were in Spain for years." I said, "I was going with my wife." I said, "It's nice. You going on holiday?" I said, "No." I said, "We're actually going to a joint arts and a joint artist residency." And I won't say what they said afterwards, but it's ironic that actually, in terms of, and that's been probably unkind to my academic colleagues, the world has turned full circle in terms of the stuff that we're doing now. They see this as actually being front of center of what needs to be done. So coming back to my point, what I thought initially was tangential has moved center and then has moved front and center. So anyway, this was our rethinking and art science phase. I'll talk a little bit, I think I've got two more to talk to, and I'll let Jude take over. This was Joya. I'm dyslexic, ladies and gentlemen, so I can't pronounce things. This is an Andalusia. Hoya. And this was basically a 2-week residency to do our own thing. We were the first sort of scientists and artists they've ever had. And we basically, I mapped the rivers, I looked at their river histories, and Jude reflected. So it's still, in my mind, still a slightly semi-passive role as an artist. You know, I as I look back now, it's only probably more recently that we have genuinely sort of co-led. And that's the way it is. Now, this is quite important, and Jude, I'm just going to click on, yeah, okay. This is quite important because I'm a geomorphologist. So that is a river scientist who works on geo, which is the earth, morphology, which is its shape and landforms. And on the left-hand side, this is a geomorphological map of the river Tawi, produced by myself and colleagues which shows the changes in river pattern, movements, and history. And I have no artistic talents at all, but I've probably got I know I've got a very good imagination, and I can think in 4D. And what me and Jude were surprised about is if you look on the right-hand side, these are some of Jude's lino cuts. And what we thought is that in terms of what I do is that I'm understanding the way that rivers make marks. And as someone called Mark, it becomes a bit sort of odd, but we have Mark anyway.
Mark making.
Mark making by Mark. And what we realized that in terms of Jude's practice, you know, I look at this here on the right hand side and I say, wow, that looks like a big meander bend, and I can see some scrolling, you know, I could get into that. And just look at it, it's just Jude's lino cut. So we realized that in terms of what she was doing, and this took a lot of love, hate, drinking, socializing, and the rest of it, that actually we were both mark makers in different forms. I'll pass over to you.
Yeah, so we went off to this off-grid location in Andalusia in Spain, spending 2 weeks there in a fabulous artist residency place called Hoya. You can look that up. But we couldn't take much with us. There was no press. It was really basic. I just took some blocks. We couldn't use any chemicals or any inks that were, you know, oil-based. Everything needed to be recycled, and our water was recycled as well that we had to use. So I took very thin papers, and that was when really I started working with transparent papers that you could print on the front and the back and then turn it round. So you got reflections of the same woodcut. And this resulted in surprises. And the surprises seemed to reflect not only themselves, what the woodcut was about, but what the land wanted to say to us. And that was the fascinating thing. And that was really an avenue into making images where there was unexpected results that seemed to speak themselves from the land. And that's what happened really. And those landscapes, the spirit of the Ramblers, the red one that you can see there, was the high, dry rivers, the really hot, arid areas, the hard going for us to walk across it, to map it. And then that contrasted with the almond groves. And there it looked like when we reproduced the maps of those and reflected those, the bones of the land, they became very different type of images which spoke for themselves without really our control.
So yeah, that was a bit of a, if I can sort of reflect back, that was a bit of a tipping point in terms of understanding what we were doing. And just to sort of go back, for me, it was quite profound because I was just doing my job, so to speak, in terms of mapping these landscapes. And we deliberately chose a river system which had been less impacted by humans, which was the Ramblers shown at the top and bottom left, and another part of the system which was irrigated, which had terraces and so on. And I produced maps of both of these. And it was only by the reflection of these that actually the whole became greater than the sum of the parts in terms of it describing the essence of what was there. And I knew as a geomorphologist that there were differences, but how to convey that in a visual form beyond simply my rather boring mapping was a very different matter. So this was a bit of a turning, a bit of a tipping point into the stuff that we were doing. Again, I'll just carry on. This is 2013. I've got yet another new project working in Brisbane, looking at the Brisbane Floods. I think I was an ARC professorial research fellow there. And what we did with a very good friend of ours called Jude Roberts, and that's Jude down there. So I had the two Judes, so this was rather good actually. The two Judes, Jude Roberts and Jude Macklin there. And this was working at a small town called Mitchell on the Wanganui River, which was dramatically impacted by the major floods in 2013. And Jude led the art practice. And you can see time and time again, these simple techniques of mapping. I'm obviously going through my purple phase at this time, you know, and you can see reflections. There's actually a bit of water in this dry river, which is interesting. Really beautiful satellite imagery. You can see Jude's wooden board wood blocks you were cutting from. You can see the children actually looking at the air photography, and you can see them doing what in essence was a very similar exercise to Magura in Romania, because they were dealing with change. And it was a fascinating exercise. And these are the prints which emerged from that.
So the top one, the Volsing Maranoa, is about the river up in Mitchell, which is very much the outback of Australia. We went there, didn't we? Jude and her husband took us in their Land Rover. We took everything that we needed to go and stay on their farm, a very remote and rural place. We had a spare tyre and we had everything in case we were going to break down to look after ourselves. And we mapped that area, and the river again, arid. It's dry in the summer, and in the winter when the rains came, there was a sort of tidal front wave that just washed down the river, and then suddenly there was water in it. So it was like the tide coming in from the sea, you know, one day, and you saw it, and it was there, and then the rains came, and it was no longer dry, and that was amazing. A very fascinating experience walking those rivers with Jude and her husband, and then we spent time in Brisbane and the Brisbane River at the bottom, the big woodcut again, very different. And as before, there's contrasting landscapes, contrasting areas where the rivers flow through, different rivers, and so the prints really highlight those differences. And without that context of opposites, of different environments, of finding different locations where the obvious is highlighted by something contrary to it, you know, that the project wouldn't be so effective. So usually I've wanted these contrasting areas to work with, two images to produce that bounce off against each other, the same as you would with two people creating a conversation. And in that way, it seems to be a narrative that's generated discussion from these projects, and it's a good model really to follow.
Okay, we're in the final third, but this might be the long third. So this is where we've got
10 minutes.
No, we've got plenty of time. We can. I'm sure they'll be fine. So
It's better than TV.
So again.
Is it? Oh, good.
Oh, better than TV. Oh, right, okay, so we got
Sorry,
the final approval of Veronica. We've got better TV. But what you can't see, ladies and gentlemen, they've all charged their glasses in front of them. I would love a glass actually. I'm sure Jude as well. But anyway, we've been indulgent. So in the sort of final third, and this is where we are at the moment and beyond, literally beyond, is trying to almost not sort of use the word art science. You know, it is actually the way that me and Jude think and work about things together. And we've been really lucky. You make your own luck though. And we've worked in the Southern Hemisphere for many, well, actually for nearly 10 years. And one of the most marvelous collaboration we've had is on the Wanganui. Actually, probably Rebecca, who's just gone downstairs, probably needs to hear this. And the Wanganui, as some of you may know, maybe some arguments over it, is the first river in the world that's given status, legal status, in terms of a living entity. And I work on flooding in the Wanganui. Normally at this time of year, pre-COVID, we used to spend wonderful Southern Hemisphere in late summers, autumns, in Wanganui. And you can see us canoeing down the Wanganui on the right-hand side. I can hear Rebecca coming back up the stairs. She's running in. Take your time. You can red please, would be really lovely. Thank you.
Just make everyone jealous.
No, we're adults.
This is the bit I've been waiting for.
Exactly. So I'm just keeping talking while she sits down. Bless her. Okay, thank you much, Jude.
Very
Okay.
professional.
It is okay. And this is the Wanganui. It's although we worked in Palmerston North at Massey University, and I'm still an adjunct professor there. I was a fractional professor there for many years. Fantastic place. We decided to live in Wanganui, and everyone thought we were slightly mad, but we weren't, because we loved it. We've got some of our very, very best friends there. That's us canoeing down the Wanganui. And as weird things often happen with us, or certainly with me, the second year we were there was a huge flood. And I was involved with the New Zealand government and also with Massey University to try and evaluate both the magnitude and the recurrence interval of that flood. You know, was that the biggest flood in the last 100 years, 1,000 years, and so on? And what we did was, this is the Wanganui River, about 20 kilometers upstream of Wanganui City. I'm going to academic mode here. If I can get the arrow to work, come to me, arrow, there we go. Flow is from top right to bottom left. And can you see that there is a really beautiful valley meander cutoff? So this is not sort of your usual single river channel neck cutoff. This is a whole valley meander, okay? And it's about, if you walk around it, come back, little pointer, where you gone? There we go.
Sorry, that's filled with water.
So that was the original, that's about 3 kilometers, okay? And what we did, it was, and what we did is we drilled that. And what you can see there, color coded, is the grey bits, and I think that is my hand. Yes, it is. It's my old watch. Go back that bit there. Is those are major floods. You see ones there, because we think this actually was cut off in a large volcanic eruption around about 260, maybe 320 AD, and each large flood has reoccupied this meander loop and produced these flood deposits. If you're really interested, there's a whole series of papers on this. And basically what it shows, if we just look at the bottom here, this is the record of flooding activity over the last 2,000 years. And in essence, what it shows, and we don't take it up to the historical, the European historical period, is actually there were periods, particularly in the 13th, 14th century, particularly in the 9th century, particularly in the 7th century, particularly in the 3rd century, where there were very, very large floods related to climate change. And some of our very best friends are Maori people. And because I'm dyslexic and because I can't remember their names, Jude, who are the, and you're, and actually Jude, no, Jude is we are both Marilyn and Marty. Marty is a world-class printmaker, and Marilyn is an elder in the Wanganui iwi, Wanganui tribe, and we became their very, very good friends. And over a period of 5 years, they came to sort of believe what I could see on the river, and started, and there was another Maori elder called Southern who took us, I'll go back a bit. This is us rowing down, that's Southern there. So he was the Maori leader. That's me and Jude. And as we went down the Wanganui River, I said, oh, I didn't say what I did. And I just started pointing out things. And by the end of the journey, she became a lifelong friend and introduced us to our Maori friends in Wanganui. And this then started a huge debate in terms of what science and art, spirituality and stuff could bring to actually understanding river histories, flooding and so on. And that is ongoing. And those are the Constantine books.
Yeah, it's always starts.
Always starts with the books. I look like I'm slightly demented. You look very stripy. But anyway, there we go.
Yeah, and spending over 5 years, a couple of months every year in Wanganui. I was able to use the print workshop. Marty Reed ran his own print workshop and introduced and we met several other printmakers as well. New Zealand has quite a condensed printmaking community. And they were so welcoming and involved us, and we actually set up with our Bristol printmakers joint exhibitions and swaps of work. And actually they came over here and delivered talks at our Bristol printmakers. So we set up really this long-term friendship and networking from the other side of the world. These are prints that I did while I was just able to work in this fantastic workshop that Marty had. And we were very interested in eels. Eels.
Eel face.
And so was Marilyn. Marilyn loved the eels. She really wanted to come and see the eels in Wales, and then COVID hit, and it hasn't quite happened that they can visit yet, but we hope they can. But this is the print that I did. I am the river and the river is me. And that's the Maori saying about the Wanganui, and that's based on sort of their word of mouth, their stories, their creation myths, really, if that's what they would call them.
Will.
There we go. And if we just
Okay, so quite a large woodcut again, but well, using transparent papers, starting off with experience of the river, having canoed down it and lived on it for 3 days. Using the maps, knowing the landscape, the very particular, peculiar landscape that the river ran through. And making a big woodcut of that on very fine papers. Yeah, yeah, because I mean that's very kind of job.
Well, you can't because we're about 2/3 of the way through it. So get the crap.
Yeah, so again, printing once from the block, printing again, and then fixing the second print in reverse on top of the first printed image from the same block. So in that, there becomes a face emerging, or anything that you want to see in that, really, but it's one image on top of the other, and the top image is reversed and sandwiched on a translucent paper.
Okay.
Giving a voice to the river speaking to us in anything that you want to see in that image.
And to share Jude's blushes, that print was accepted and hung, as I understand, in the Royal Academy show in summer 2020. But we never got to see it, which is a bit of a shame. But that's the way.
We didn't get to go to the party.
Exactly, that's where rock and roll is. Okay, we'll move this on a bit because we're having real struggles here in terms of technology, but we won't rush it because actually there's some nice stuff here. And if folks want to drop out, then do. But we'll carry on talking because we're talking with folks here. So just be patient, as I'm sure you understand. You know where Corris is, and we're not into. So the next project we're involved with was called Rivers of Gold. Again, it was partially led by me because I had an international fellowship at La Trobe. I have an interest in metal mining. This is as scary as climate change. I won't depress you because I won't. But one of the elements of this is actually looking at the legacy of mining around the planet. And I've worked with a fantastic team at La Trobe, particularly Susan Lawrence, an archaeologist there. This is the impact of mining in terms of mining waste, filling up valley floors. It's called sludge. And to give it some sort of contemporary context, you've probably seen on the news recently, the big, what are called tailings dam failures in places like Papua New Guinea and also Brazil. And going back one slide, this is what was happening on a regular basis in much of Australia and actually much of the UK in the late 19th century and early 20th century. So this has come onto the radar now. And this is a special picture because there we go. We keep going now.
Well, you could explain who it is.
Well, just be patient, and we might do. This is a wonderful meeting that Jude and Susan Lawrence organised. I had a small part, and I'll let Jude explain how it began and what involved?
Well, our rivers of gold with archaeologists, artists from New Zealand, from Wales, and Australia.
True.
In fact, the three areas, three groups of printmakers who joined together with the scientists, with the archaeologists at La Trobe. And the conference, there was a conference that lasted about 4 days or a week.
Yeah.
And the exhibition ran alongside that. And as artists, were given an equal voice to the scientists in this conference. And Veronica came over and was able to be there in person as well, which was fantastic.
And I'll just say, we worked out that that was the last time I saw Mark, because,
Yes.
Of course, that visit, a couple of weeks after that conference, we all went into that really wonderful, quiet life we've had.
Into lockdown, so we just got back really in time.
Okay.
But Rivers of Gold, yeah, really, international exhibition where different groups of four or five or six places, because it was exhibited in Australia, in other places, in New Zealand, in other places, and in Wales as well, on several occasions.
On several occasions. Go on, click it. Very well, Jones.
Mary Lord Jones was in it, yeah. Susan came over and we took her up to the mine waste areas as well. But she came over from Australia and stayed with us, and it was truly interdisciplinary.
Okay, on the homeward straight, because I must admit, if I was you guys, my patience would just start going, but we're just sort of musing that in terms of this COVID world with Zoom and poor internet connection, I suppose our tolerance has been increased or not these days. And the last sort of bit is really brings us sort of full circle in terms of how genuinely art and science becomes greater than the sums become greater than the whole. And we started this, I'm not going to read the text. We started this in Lincoln, which is my current institution, and Jude is a creative fellow in the Lincoln Centre of Water and Planetary Health, which I co-direct. So there's no nepotism there or family favours. I'm being harassed by the audience here at this point, but not for the first time today.
Got used to it now.
I have got used to it. But the more serious point is that in terms of the way that, thank you, Abby, brilliant. In terms of the way that, particularly in the UK, that we are going to experience and live the impacts of climate change, is in terms of the frequency of extreme weather and hydrological events. And we've had floods, droughts, heat waves, and if you can remember, was it 2018, the beast, or was it 19? The beast from the east, the snowmageddons, and so on. As I've written here, much of this stuff, and it's not just the UK, and many other parts of the world, what I've described rightly or wrongly as climate weirding will be played out on our floodplains, on our rivers. So, and I know we've got a friend in Queensland. I didn't really look at where other folk were from, probably from the UK.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, UK. And in terms of where we live, it's going to be in our rivers and floodplains where we will actually face the consequences of what I put here as environmental breakdown. So one of the things we talked about on our walk today was the re-engagement with rivers. and then me not being a teacher, I was never a very good teacher. I'm a good researcher. I'm not sure I'm a good teacher. I try to.
You were excellent.
Oh, that's right. Veronica's trying to be kind to me now, but I'm used to it. I know she means that. But the serious point, they're being cheeky again. So the serious point is that in terms of our rivers and our floodplains, we do need to re-educate people, and we actually need to re-educate our politicians and our planners not to build in floodplains in the first place. And I think uniquely in terms of the arts, the humanities and the sciences, because we have stories, we have histories, we have archaeology, we have images, we have beauty, we have ugliness. And because it actually matters where we live, these are the first places that we really need to understand. So this was going to be quite a big sort of project, but the pandemic intervened, and that's probably a story in itself. But nevertheless, we do think it could be a vehicle. Thank you. Do think it would be a vehicle. And this is, there's one more slide after this. Do think this would be a vehicle in terms of exploring art and science in a meaningful way that has community engagement, that doesn't scare people, that can actually work intergenerationally. So you can talk to your granny or your mum or your great granny. You can talk to your grandchildren or your whatever. It's your pets even. But it's going to be the ground zero in terms of how we actually experience these impacts, and the sooner that we actually engage with that, I think the better. I'm going to carry on talking to the end, and Jude can take the first questions. So in terms of concluding thoughts, I suppose that the thing that me and Jude can do is that we realise the importance of pattern recognition and interpretation. I think in terms of doing this stuff, you've got to work in 4D. We're late in the evening. Are we past the 9 o'clock watershed? Yeah, we are. They took the piss out of me in terms of the artworks I produced. It's not my strength. My strength is in visualization. The imagination I got is scary. But it's thinking things through. It's got to be community-based. And that, I think, it's got to be meaningfully community-based. It's not going to be a tick box thing. And I'm sick of tick box things. It's got to be working, it's transdisciplinary, it's paradisciplinary. That actually means beyond disciplines. So, and it's co-produced. It's through a discussion. Each of us have our skills. How do we do it? You find time, and this has been a privilege of being here the last few days. It's very often low techs. It's often going back to basics in terms of stuff, and it's by sustaining a relationship, and it's building up those relationships. And if you're really interested in this stuff, there's a little bibliography there which we can share. And this is probably where I'll choke up at this point, because I know what this picture is going to be, because this is me and Jude, and they're now giggling. And Dylan actually is leaning towards the screen. You can look at it on here. It's far clearer.
That was rowing from
Ireland.
From
We
Ireland
are.
to
No,
Wales.
Hello. So this is me.
Aberystwyth Rowing Club.
This is me and Jude when we were 20.
We rowed across the Irish Sea.
This is we have a relationship in terms of rowing, which is a haptic thing, yeah, we do our stuff. I'm all right. And that's actually us in the Mara Noah in Queensland, and I'll stop now. And this is us now.
And this is us.
And this is us.
No.
Right.